Uh, my dear friends, today is a very important day. We are happy to have and we are privileged to have Professor Sunil K. Pandya, Professor of Neurosurgery from Mumbai.
You will notice that I have put a subheading here that has two components. One is ethical component and the other one is philosophical component. Why have I used this word philosophical? Because much depends on the way in which we think, our philosophy on any given issue, and on the way in which the people for whom we want to work think, their philosophy. And that was also highlighted very well in this talk, that it is not a one-sided, development is not a one-sided program. Development has two sides, and perhaps the other side, not our side, but the other side is more important than what we have to offer, do, etc. So let's start off with the first slide. And again, most of us are exposed to books, journals, papers which have been published in the West. So they've been published in America, they've been published in England or Great Britain, Germany, Europe, other European countries and so on. And we tend to start thinking the way they influence us into thinking, which may not always be correct, because their perspectives are based on their needs, their requirements, their experiences. Our needs, our requirements, our experiences may not be the same. They may be different in many areas. So this is how an average Western expert on public health looks at issues in public health. These are the issues which concern that person. Whereas for us, it's much simpler and also at the same time more complicated, because we are dealing with very fundamental basic problems which they have mastered about 50-60 years ago, but which we are still struggling with. So we are worried about, whilst the Westerner thinks in a very sophisticated manner and produces a slide like this, we will produce a slide like this because this is all that we have to produce slides. And these are the issues which trouble us and the people for whom we wish to work. So we should not be blinded by what we get from abroad. It is important for us to develop our own perspectives, our own philosophy, and build on our experience and the experience of our people, of Indians, of Keralites, of Tamilians, of Himachal Pradesh experts, because each one has got, each group has got his or her own special experience which is very relevant to that area. And this is where we have to learn from. Now, we have unfortunately, and as Ernesto Siroli also pointed out, politicians and governments, instead of trying to help us and instead of trying to build and to create, have often gone along different paths which are almost at right angles to the path where they should have gone. So instead of creating development, instead of creating health, hygiene, instead of creating educational facilities, providing everybody a decent home with running water and toilets, so far our governments have failed dismally in all these areas, with the result that we have all these kinds of problems. These are cartoons which were drawn by a gentleman called R.K. Lakshman. Do all of you know about R.K. Lakshman? That was his brother, R.K. Narayan. Malgudi days and the Malgudi story, that was his brother. R.K. Lakshman was fundamentally a cartoonist. He has written books also, but his strong point was cartoons. And he was the sole cartoonist for the Times of India for almost 30-40 years. And his cartoons were respected all over the country. And even people like Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and Indira Gandhi and all these people whom he caricatured, on whom he drew cartoons, they treasured his cartoons, because he was so witty and he was never offensive. He was always trying to be constructive. So therefore, even the people whom he criticized, they valued his cartoons. And these are his cartoons about the India that should have been but never was, and the India that it is today. And unfortunately, in most parts of India, this is what obtains even right now. Some experts have drawn up this model of what primary health care should focus on, what are the issues that should be components, essential components of primary health care. And I'm only going to talk about health services because I'm not competent to talk about the other areas. So let's talk about health services. And there is this question which immediately confronts us as soon as we start thinking about public health care. Is there a gap? Is there a gap between those of us who are privileged to live in cities, to be educated in cities, and to function in cities? Is there a gap between us and the people who live and work and get whatever meager education they can in our villages? And the obvious answer is, of course, there's a gap. There's a huge gap. And I've listed 2 or 3 problems which are consequences of that gap. The first thing is that most times people who live in big towns and cities are financially better off than the average villager. I'm not talking of rich farmers, I'm talking of the average villager. You know, they are relatively very, very poorly off, and that's why we read of farmer suicides, and I'm sure it happens in many states. Certainly it happens in my state of Maharashtra. Then there is this perception which Siroli warned us about in his film. There is a perception about us being different from them. We look upon them as somebody different and ourselves as something different. And unfortunately, we consider ourselves as superior and we consider them as inferior, which is the biggest stumbling block that you can ever have in an attempt to develop, in an attempt to help. As he quite correctly pointed out, unless we are equals, we cannot learn from each other, we cannot talk to each other, we cannot understand problems, and therefore we cannot devise solutions. One great fallacy that people who have been educated, graduates, postgraduates, doctorates, whatever, is that those who have not had the good fortune which we have had and have therefore remained illiterate, they don't even know how to read and how to write, that they are in some way inferior to us and they may even be somewhat stupid, meaning you have to treat them as if they are little children and you have to talk to them in a completely different manner as if they were intellectually deficient or whatever. This is a glaring error. The illiterate person has to survive with difficulties much greater than the difficulties which a literate person has to face during his survival. He has got so many things going for him. He's literate, he's got connections, he's got contacts. The illiterate person has nothing. And in the face of nothing, that person has survived and maybe even flourished in a small way. He may have built a little tea shop, or he may have a 100 square yard farm on which he's growing something and earning a living. So things which we could never have done in that person's position, that person has done. In that sense, he is superior to us and not the other way around. And Ernesto Siroli talked about paternalism and how we can sometimes be, as a consequence of being paternalistic, we become patronizing. We treat them as if we are treating dogs, or as if we are treating children, or we are treating some kind of mentally deficient people, which is one of the greatest mistakes that we can ever make. It is true that if you try and convey abstract ideas to a person from a village, it may be difficult for that person to grasp because that person is not used to thinking of abstract concepts. That person is used to thinking of practical things. how do I get manure? How do I get seeds? How do I get the money to buy this or whatever? So the entire thinking, the entire philosophy is based on practical issues, not on abstract thinking, not on what may happen 25 years later if this and this and this change in these manners. That's not the way they think. Sometimes they lack, as Siroli also pointed out, certain areas of expertise. They may not be very good in management. They may not be very good in looking after finances. They may not be very good in devising high technology. But technology which they need, they have already made, they have already provided, they are already using. But if you ask them about high technology, then they will be in a bit of a mess because they've never had to deal with that problem. And we should never ever consider ourselves as givers. We are giving you something. There's no giving, there's no taking. There's just sharing. We are sharing what we have with them. We will want to share what they have with us on a very equal basis. So there's no giver. We are not superior. We are not big. We are not in any way great. We are just like them, but we happen to have some privileges. Now, if we develop this feeling of superiority, and if we consider ourselves to be high, and if we consider themselves to be low, then these are the problems which will follow. That they will never be able to talk to us. We will never be able to understand what they are trying to say. And then you will have all the hippos from the Zambezi River coming and eating up all the crops because you didn't bother to ask them, why are you not cultivating crops in this fertile valley? So all the efforts that we make may come to a big zero. Now, what are the lessons that we need to learn, each of us? If we want to really go and do useful work, and if we want to see this useful work develop and help improve the current status of those individuals who live in villages and in small towns, not improve the way we think they should improve the way they want to improve, which is Siroli's great lesson to us. Don't talk to them about Porsche and Mercedes and Ford. It is irrelevant to them. Talk about a better wheel for a cart. Talk about a better plow, because if they are farmers, that is what they need. They don't need all these fantastic fancy gadgets. So I come back to the same lesson which Siroli has taught us, that we need to look at their views, we need to look at their practices, we need to know from them what do they need, we need to know from them what do they think is the best way of meeting that need. Because they have struggled, they know what will help them, they know what will not help them. So if we do that, chances are we'll be able to improvise or develop something which will genuinely help them. If, as Siroli pointed out, we sit with them in a place where they are familiar. It may be under a banyan tree. It may be sitting on the ground in the dust. It may be sitting on a charpoy. It may be sharing a cup of tea at the local tea vendor's shop. If we sit with them in environments in which they are familiar and at home, we can have a genuine dialogue. If we call them to a 3-star hotel and we sit on chairs and they sit on the ground, we can never have a meaningful dialogue. We have to meet them on their grounds, in their circumstances, and genuinely become friends with them. That's the term he used. You become friends with them, then they trust you. If they trust you and you trust them, now we can make progress. Okay? Now, there are times when we do need to convey scientific principles to them. For instance, they may not know why we keep talking of canals to drain sewage into a central depository where the sewage can be converted into manure. Oh, we've been going out into the fields and doing our jobs, and that's what we've been doing for centuries. Why do we need to change? Why do we need a toilet from which there will be a drain which will go into a pit from where that can be converted into manure? We don't need that. We do it straight, direct in the fields. So we need to convey the scientific reasons why this is better than that. Now when we need to do that, again we need to talk to them on their terms. We need to use examples which are familiar to them. We can talk of disease, we can talk of how work days are lost, how income goes down, how they have to spend on drugs and money which they can ill afford. And if we develop this kind of a system, and if it cuts down on diarrhea and dysentery and loss of work days and expenditure on drugs, they may tend to listen to us. So we have to talk to them in terms of their understanding, their problems, their principles. And whatever we say, we need to make it simple enough for them to understand. We can't expect them to understand scientific terms because they've never been exposed to scientific terms. Over time, when they get educated, then they will understand scientific terms. But till then, we have to come and be at the same level that they are and be very simple. And there must be times, at all times, we have to be absolutely, totally honest. You can't cheat them. You can't fool them. The moment you do that, you lose their trust. The moment you lose their trust, everything is going to fail. So you have to be absolutely honest with them. And there will be times when they will tell you something which you don't know, then tell them, oh, I didn't know this at all. I'm very glad you brought this to my notice because I'm learning this. And maybe I can pass this lesson on to the group in the next village or the next town that I'm going to visit. And they will learn from you and they will benefit from you. So be honest, confess your ignorance where you are ignorant. There's no shame. All of us are ignorant on something or the other. And if they know something from their practical experience which we don't know, we are learning from them. And then we should be able to tell them that. Finally, as far as this particular group of lessons is concerned, do not thrust high technology on them. Again, a lesson which Siroli tried to teach us. Do not trust what you think they need. They may not need that at all. So you give them a high technology device which is very, very expensive, and you go there 5 years later and you'll find that that is lying rusted in a corner because either they didn't know how to use it, or one spare part went out and that spare part was not available and they couldn't get another spare part, or they just found that it was too complicated to use and they had simpler methods of using it. So don't trust high technology on them. Wait for them to tell you, is there a better way by which I can pump water from the canal which is flowing past my farm into my canal so that I can get water exactly when my plants need it? Is there a way, is there a technique? Then you can discuss with them. Well, there is this technique, if you used it, it can do this. Then they will accept what you want and they will also then look after that technology because they wanted that technology, they needed it. But if you thrust high technology on them, it may be completely irrelevant and it may be a waste of time, energy and money. And also remember that high technology doesn't solve all problems. Now look at the problem that this person faces. There is an illness in this village, in this home, in this family, and they have consulted a doctor electronically and that doctor has sent them an SMS that you need this drug. But there is no place where they can get this drug within 100 kilometers of this village. Where is that person supposed to get the drug? How is that person supposed to get this drug? So first of all, somebody has to now travel 100 kilometers to get that drug. Time, energy, expense, loss of earning. And secondly, if there is nobody who can go, then you are now engendering frustration which was not there earlier. Now you are making the family feel frustrated, you are making the family feel miserable. Already there is enough misery and you are adding to their misery. So be very judicious and careful even in the use of simple, what we consider simple technology. Now cell phones are available everywhere. They are available in villages, they are available with people who sell fish, they are available with people who sell grains, everybody has cell phones. But don't expect that because they have a cell phone, all their problems will get solved. They won't get solved. In fact, some problems will get more complicated because of the availability of cell phones. These are some lessons about finding solutions to local problems. And I think this is common sense, isn't it? That the solutions must be, first of all, practical. You can't tell them something which is impossible in their area and in their circumstances. Number two, as far as possible, the solution should use everything locally. They should use local manpower, they should use materials available locally, they should use technology available locally. If a piece of pottery can do a job, then don't tell them to get a cooling machine. If you can make a pot where water can evaporate and what is kept inside that pot remains cool, don't tell them to buy a refrigerator. A refrigerator is not valid in their area. It's not possible. But pots are possible, and they know how to make these pots, and they know how to devise mechanisms by which the water will evaporate from the pot and keep whatever is inside it relatively cool. We are now having illustrations. We know this cold chain for vaccines. There are now cold chain mechanisms made of earthenware pots. They use nothing but earthenware pots and water to keep the vaccine at a required temperature. There are models now which have been developed, such models. This is relevant to them. To tell them buy a cold storage machine or buy a freezer or buy a refrigerator is not practical for them. It's not feasible. So local devices, local solutions, local materials, and then working together as equals. And finally, review from time to time, because we may need to modify, we may need to readjust, we may need to get something more in or take something out which is not working. So periodic review. And of course, if we have to get equipment, because for some things there is no alternative to equipment, then we have to build into that project or proposal the maintenance of that equipment. Don't just get that equipment, dump it there and forget about it, because it will be finished. In that project, there must be a built-in mechanism for periodic evaluation of that equipment, for maintenance of that equipment, obtaining spare parts, whatever is required for that equipment has to be built into the project itself. Otherwise, this is what is going to happen. Now, there are some specific issues which have been listed by people who are experts in this field. The first, as you will see, is to give them power, empower them. Don't be the powerful individual there. You be the lowest of the persons who is involved in that program. Make them the big people. If you make them the big people, that project will succeed. If you make them feel as if they are miserable, tiny little worms, that project will never succeed. So empower them, make them feel that they are doing the project and the success of the project depends on them. And when the project is successful, give them full credit in every single avenue that you can talk about. If you give them credit, they feel proud, they feel more confident in taking up other projects and doing something more. I will not talk about informed consent, because informed consent is a very complex topic. But one method that public health experts have found useful, particularly when you are doing a survey, for instance, is it is difficult to explain to each and every person in a village all the pros and cons of a given step to be taken. Say it is collection of blood for some tests. To talk to each and every person in that village and explain to them all this is difficult. So what some experts have found is, find the people who are the influential people in that community. The Gram Panchayat members, the chairman of the Gram Panchayat, the representative of the ladies of the village, whoever, the local school teacher, find the influential people, explain everything to them. Let them hold a meeting with the villagers in which you are present. So if they want to ask questions, you will answer them. But they will explain to the villagers in their terms, in their language, in their mechanisms of teaching, and they will obtain consent. And apparently this is legally valid if it is videotaped. So this is just one method which has been used about informed consent. And as public health workers, and particularly if you go there as a doctor, then you have to pay special attention to the rights and responsibilities of each member of that village. Whilst you consider their rights and while you cater to their rights, it is also important to give them responsibilities and then monitor whether they are carrying out those responsibilities or not. Monitoring many times is of much greater importance than the actual step itself. Because you take a step, don't monitor it, it will just fall down. But if you take a step and monitor it, then chances are you can carry it to completion. I don't know how many of you have read this book by David Werner. It's an old book, about 25-30 years old. It's called Where There Is No Doctor. And it was written for communities in which there is no medical personnel at all. And originally I think it was written for African communities, and then it was used all over the world. The name is Werner, W-E-R-N-E-R, David Werner. He has written a number of books after that. I'm not sure whether he is alive or dead. I don't know. But it was written many years ago. Since he wrote this book, there are many other books which have come out along similar lines. So it might be worth your while going through some of these books. Maybe you can start with David Werner's books, because the book exemplifies the importance of what is practical. In the given circumstances, what is practical? Do that. Finally, I mean, as far as these specific issues are concerned, there is the state of our primary health centers. I know a little bit about some primary health centers in Maharashtra, and they are appalling. There is no doctor, although on paper there is a doctor. There are no drugs, although on paper there are drugs. There is no one to carry out simple tests, look for malarial parasites, look for microfilaria, examine urine for albumin, sugar. There is nobody to do that. Why? Because the people who are supposed to be doing that are doing private practice in the same area, and whoever comes there is being sent to that center so that they can make more money out of that. So this is the state of primary health centers, some of them, in my state, which is the state of Maharashtra. I don't know what the state of primary health centers is there in the states that you work in. If they are better, then you are lucky. If they are not better, then it is up to us to try and make them better. Now, these can only be made better by honesty and by sincerity. They cannot be made better by government passing rules or the government passing any laws. It can't work, because no government has the ability to monitor every single primary health center in every single state. It's just not possible. So until and unless our characters improve, the characters of us, doctors, public health workers, unless our character improves, it is unlikely that these primary health centers will improve. It's sad, but that's how it is. And it is a great pity that that lady got an SMS about a drug which is available 100 kilometers away, where it could have been available in the primary health center half a kilometer or two-thirds of a kilometer away. But there is no primary health center functioning. So where is that person supposed to go? And one of the big responsibilities that all of us have today is to make our primary health centers work. If we do that, a large part of our battle is won. But it can only be done by honesty and by sincerity. Now, This is the other aspect, corruption. Why is it that primary health center workers can take drugs from the primary health center and then sell them in an adjacent area in the same village? Because the person who's supposed to monitor that primary health center has been paid off. And therefore, that person doesn't mind that this is what is happening at the primary health center. So, this is another factor which plays a big role, corruption. And how to solve that corruption, I don't know, except changing character. And changing character is very easy to talk about, but extremely difficult to do. This is a philosophical term which was used in ancient Greek, and I'm going to leave you with this word. I didn't know the meaning of this word myself when I first read it, and I had to look it up. But I feel that this is an admirable word, and the concept is brilliant. If an individual possesses this quality, sophrosine, then that person has temperance. That means moderation in everything that that person does. That person is prudent. He will do what is possible and what is practical. And the last two are the most important criteria. That person is pure and has control over his own desires and over his own wishes. We need people with this quality if we are going to improve.